Today we're going to be learning Sukkah Daf Nun Gimel. We are very, very close to the end of the Masechet. Tzrat Hashem, we will be finishing on Wednesday. As I said, I'll repeat again, the Siyum will be a Sukkah Siyum on the go. So that means we'll be learning in the morning, regular Zoom time, and doing the Siyum with the Hadrons at the Zoom class. Everything, as usual, will be recorded, and anyone who wants to listen can listen to the recording after. In addition, there'll be a slew of shiurim that you can listen to by Dr. Shana Schick, by Dr. Yael Ziegler, by Rabbanit Yael Shimoni, and those will be, you can take with you and learn at your convenience. Okay, today's daf is sponsored by Elaine Hochberg in honor of Arya Hochberg. You are a constant support in my journey of learning. Thank you for the encouragement and the joy. Okay, with that, we will start our daf. We have a very interesting daf, kind of a mix of a bunch of different things, including some strange Agadic stories, some juggling and other tricks by the rabbis that they would do both at the Simcha Peta Shoeva and others in other situations. Then we're going to finish off the daf with learning about when they would blow the trumpets in the times of the temple, how many trumpets were blown on a regular day, on particular days, etc. So we're going to start with Lo haya chatzer b'Yerushalayim, the very bottom of Nun Bet Amud Bet. It's a quote from the Mishnah. There was no courtyard in Jerusalem that didn't benefit from the light of the Simcha Peta Shoeva, this big celebration that would go on. Okay, maybe I'll even describe a little bit, go into a little more detail, which is the Simcha Peta Shoeva. We're going to see it in today's daf. It started in the afternoon, after the afternoon sacrifice was brought, and it went all night long into the wee hours of the morning until as early as, and that's why the Kohanim do this procession. These two Kohanim leave, and as they go out, as we saw in the Mishnah, as they go down the steps, they blow the trumpets. Then they go to the gate, they blow the trumpets. And they have this procession that basically, where are they going? It's leading them out to gather the water for the Simcha Peta Shoeva, for the Nisuch HaMayim. Okay, if you remember, we mentioned before that Rashi says, and others think that the Simcha Peta Shoeva was part of the Nisuch HaMayim ceremony, which is, it was leading to it, and therefore was all connected because it's a water holiday, all about water. In fact, Dr. Yael Ziegler is going to talk about the importance of water on Sukkot and connect to some of these ideas. The Rambam thinks that it's part of the din of Simcha of Yom Tov. And yes, they did this big celebration, and it went until the morning, until they went out and they kind of, go out to get the water for the water libation, but not that it was part of the mitzvah of the water libation. It was just part of the mitzvah of Simcha Yom Tov. And why on Sukkot? What about all the other holidays? So we saw already that the word Simcha appeared specifically in the verses about Sukkot. So because of that, it had an added element of Simcha. It was also nice to connect it to this week's Parsha, where it said, we read yesterday, Tachad asher lo avadat et Hashem Elokecha b'simcha v'tshuv levav, and the tochacha, and when the people get all the things that are going to go wrong, and because they didn't go in the way of God, it says you will be punished because you didn't worship God with simcha. And this is a very important element of this whole section in the Gemara, how important it is to worship God out of love. And that's what we're going to see, that they use this as an opportunity to talk about, to encourage people to go in the way of God. Like they use this big celebration, okay, and maybe because the celebration, they wanted to have a religious meaning to it, or a theological meaning to it. A lot of today's stuff is about theology and the connection between crime and punishment and all that. And maybe that's why also we're going to see the things that they said today connect with that theme. So with all that, we're going to say that the light of the Simcha Peta, and this is why I brought this up right now, because of the light, why they have all this light, because it was at nighttime. So they needed to light the menorot, and they would have these celebrations all night. So it says, it was so bright that there's a bright that says, Tana Ishai taboreret chitim leor shel Beit HaShoeva. A woman was able to sift through her grains, specifically with the light, right, the wheat grains, with the light of the Simcha Peta Shoeva, right? She was sifting, I guess, to see if there were bugs or anything else, where you obviously need really good light. Anyone who's ever done this, right? If you sift your grains and you try to look through to make sure there's no bugs, you really need good light, otherwise you really won't see them. So she could use this light for those purposes, to which Tosfos says, the Yerushalmi asks, how could she possibly use this light? Wasn't this oil of hekdesh from the temple? And how could you benefit from temple light? To which the Yerushalmi answers, Tosfos quotes in the first Tosfos of the daf here, Dikol umareh v'reach ein behem mishum mi'ilah. The Gemara in, I forgot where it is. Yeah, the Gemara in, and he actually doesn't quote the Gemara, but the Gemara says I'm guessing it's in Me'ilah, but I'm not sure, but that we've seen this before. I mean, definitely taught it, which is that voice, sight, like seeing things, and smell, there's no laws of Me'ilah. You can use it and it won't be considered misuse of consecrated property. So that's how the Yerushalmi answers the question. But Tosfos says that doesn't really make sense, because even if you say Ein behem mishum Me'ilah, it doesn't mean it's allowed. Right? If you remember in Masechet Shabbat, we kept having patur, but patur meant patur of alasul. You're exempt, but it means you're exempt, but it doesn't mean you're allowed to do it. It's still forbidden by rabbinic law. This also, it should still be forbidden, they say. So it shouldn't be that she can sift her stuff. So Toso basically says, this is just theoretical. It's saying the light was so bright that if a woman were to be able to sift her grains using the light, she could, but not that she actually really could, because it would be using something that was hekdesh and she's not allowed to, which then raises a whole problem that all the people who lived in Jerusalem on those nights had it, right? They couldn't benefit from the light that was coming to them, according to Tosfos. So anyway, it's probably a bit of a debate about whether this light is actually forbidden or not. Because you might say, what do you mean? It's light, right? How can I not use it? So anyway, that's a whole interesting question in of itself. Chasidim va'anshe ma'aseh. So they would say, according to the Mishnah, shirot v'tishbachot, sing songs and praises. So the question is, what exactly were they saying? Tanu Rabbanit. Yesh mehen omrim. Some of them would say, ashrei yaldutenu shelo bishad signutenu. Blessed is our youth, that it didn't embarrass us in our older age, right? We're not embarrassed about the things we did when we were young, right? What immediately comes to my mind? All these politicians that they go to run for office, and then people start digging up their past and all the things they did in their youth, right? So here they say, Elu chasidim va'anshe ma'aseh. The chasidim and anshe ma'aseh say, wow, blessed is our youth that we're not embarrassed about anything we did all our lives. Even when we get older, right? We're not embarrassed by what we did as children. Other people are saying, blessed is our old age, that it atoned for all the sins we did when we were younger. Elu baalei tshuva, these are the baalei tshuva, the ones who returned to God. Elu ve'elu ombrim, both those and those say, ashrei mi shelo chata u'mi shechata yashuv v'yimcholo. So blessed is the one who never sinned, and the one who sinned should return to God and God will forgive him. So again, we get into all these ideas that where they're using this as an opportunity to talk about the importance of going in the way of God. Tanya, likewise, we're going to see a braita. Amru alav al Hillel hazaken, said about Hillel, right, the elder, the one who always goes with Shammai. Shaya sameach b'simcha beit hashoeva amar ken, when he was so happy in the simcha beit hashoeva, this is what he would say. There's many different interpretations of who the ani, the I, is in this sentence. Imani kan, if I am here, okay, so Rashi says the I is God. If I am here, meaning God, he's basically saying, I'm going to speak in the name of God right now, okay, which is interesting in and of itself that someone would do that. If I am here, hakol kan. God is saying, if I'm here among you, then everything's here. Like, this is great. But imeni kan, mi kan. But if I'm not here, you guys can do all the celebrating you want, but it's meaningless, basically. And again, it's trying to say, bring God into the celebration. I think, again, just like they separated the men from the women, they were concerned about all sorts of, as you know, it was reasonable to be concerned. Parties happen and things get out of control. So they're trying to remind everybody, right? Number one, keep yourselves in check here. And number two, you use it as an opportunity to get to God, right? People can get to God through simcha also. It's not just about, you know, doing serious things all the time, but there's a way to worship God through simcha. And that's what we should be trying to achieve here, to basically bring God into our celebration. Okay, there's other ways of saying ani is actually him. There's other ways of describing ani as the Jewish people. Anyway, we'll stick with the first interpretation. Hu haya omer, another thing he would say, lamakom shani ohev, sham raglayim molichot oti. The place that I love to go, that's where my feet take me. In other words, whatever you're really thinking in your heart, your feet are going to take you there. Okay? We're going to talk more about your feet taking you places in a little bit. Im tavo beiti, ani avo beitecha. So God says to the people, if you come into my house, meaning you come worship me, right? And here in the Simcha Pei Shoeva, ani avo beitecha. I will come to your house and I will bless your house. Right? You'll have sustenance, food for your children, all that. Imatem lo tavo, your good health, whatever it might be that you need. Imata lo tavo beti, but if you don't come to my house, ani lo avo betecha. I'm not going to come into your house. Shenemar b'chol makom asher azkir et shmi avo elecha uve'erachticha. In every place where my name is mentioned, you know, if you mention my name, then I will come to you and I will bless you. That's how they understand this verse. Okay. This is very famous because it's in Pirkei Avot. Another thing about Hillel, he saw Gulgolet Achad shetzaf al pnei hamayim. He saw a skull that was, floating on the water, that someone had obviously murdered him, chopped off his head. Amar la, he said to the skull, al da'atef atfuch. It must be because of you must have cut off someone else's head, and that's why your head is cut off. Umitifayach yitufun, and the ones who cut off your head are going to also get punished. In other words, everything that goes around comes around, or everyone that, you will get what's coming to you, and, you got what's coming to you, and others will get what's coming to them. Whoever did this will be punished, and that God is behind all of this. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, we're back to now the raglaim. So Hillel had said that your feet take you to the place where your heart desires, right? So it's basic. I think what he's trying to say, it's like when people get drunk on Purim. It's always a big debate. Is it a good thing to get drunk on Purim? Is it not a good thing to get drunk on Purim? And people who are good people, generally the drunkenness brings out the good in them. But people who have some other things going on, sometimes it brings out a bad side of them. So I think that's what Hillel is trying to get at, really, which is if you have good intentions in your heart, even things you do involuntarily will be good, right? They'll take you to good places. Rabbi Yochanan is saying something a little bit different. Ragloi debar inish inin arevim be. Your legs, like they're in charge of you, really. They can take over, and they can take you to places you don't even really want to go. La atar dimitabe tama molivin yate. Sometimes God has other plans for you in mind, and he wants to trip you up in something. This is more similar, I guess, to what Hillel said at the end about this Golgolet al pnei hamayim, that in the end, you're going to get what's coming to you, which is sometimes your legs will take you to a place where something bad's supposed to happen to you. And, that's where you're supposed to be judged, or, they're going to take back from you whatever was supposed to happen to you is going to happen. Okay. And that's where your legs are going to take you. And for that, we have a story. Hanu tarte kushai davukaime kame shlomo. There were two kushim that were in front of Shlomo. Now, kushim are usually people with darker skin, which in those days, nowadays people wouldn't speak this way anymore. But in those days, and there are people who do, but it's not viewed on as a positive thing. It meant people with dark skin. It was looked at as they were not as beautiful. That was the idea here of what they're trying to say. Because again, right, beauty is what you're used to, and that wasn't what they were used to. But Rashi says it's actually what we say lashon sagina hol, which is it actually means beautiful people, and it was using that as a euphemism. Again, it's a little difficult always when they use these terms in a negative way, right? We have trouble viewing them this way, but again, you have to understand the culture. So these two people who were considered beautiful their names were Elichoref and Achiyah b'nei Shisha. They were Sofrim for Shlomo. Yom echad chazia l'malach hamavet tehava ka'atzi. So one day Shlomo sees the Malach HaMavet, right? Shlomo, we know he spoke with animals, he spoke this. We'll see he had control over spirits, and apparently he could speak to the angel of death. Again, this is a story. So he sees the angel of death that's very unhappy. Amarle, right? He says, Amarle, amayat siva. Why are you so unhappy? Amarle de kabam minay hane tarte kushai diat vehachi. Because I want to have these two people. I want to kill them, but I can't get to them. Now, some people explain that the reason why I couldn't get to them, if you explain the kushim to be that they were beautiful, is maybe because of their beauty, that they were so beautiful. And that's why Shlomo thought he couldn't get to them. Now, he was mistaken, and we'll see soon, there was a reason why he couldn't get to them, but Shlomo misunderstood what the reason was. So what did Shlomo say? Figures, well, eventually he's going to get to them. So what should I do? I should protect them. How can I protect them? Interesting way. Maslinu l'seirim. He passes them on to the seirim, which were shadim. They were some kind of ghosts, evil spirits. Shadrinu l'mechoza deluz. And they took them to the shadim, kind of took them to the city of Luz. Why Luz? So Rashi explains that Luz was a place that was known. It comes up in the Gemara in Sota, but the Malach HaMavet can't get there. Figure, right? Let's protect them. Even though right now the Malach HaMavet couldn't get to them, but he figures eventually he will. And let's take them somewhere else. So it takes them to the city of Luz to protect them. Kimatu l'mechoza, when the Seirim get with these two guys to Mechoza, shchivu, they died immediately upon arriving in Luz. Didn't really work. L'machar chazia malach hamavet hava kabadach. He sees the Malach HaMavet laughing the next day. Shlomo, Amarle, amai bedichat. He says, why are you laughing? Amar le, ba'atar deba'u minei taman shadritinu. You put him exactly in the place where I needed them to get to. That was where God had decreed they were going to die. And I just couldn't get them to the place. And that was the only place where they were going to end up dying. Miyad patach Shlomo v'amar. So immediately Shlomo says, and this is exactly the words that Rabbi Yochanan had said. Obviously, Shlomo preceded Rabbi Yochanan, and not necessarily clear that Shlomo said this in the story actually happened, but they're giving the story to say, Ragloi debar inish inu narevin be la'atar de mitabe tama moli vinyate. So now we understand what this means, which is that, right, eventually, if God has something particular in mind and God wanted to kill these people, right, it was their time to die, then, but they were only going to die in this particular place, eventually their legs were going to take them there, even if it wasn't necessarily what they intended. Okay, that's a whole interesting thing in and of itself, what to do with this. Again, I think it's trying to say, right, you should always, again, there's a little bit of a hard statement to get by, right? What exactly is the message here? Because the message of Hillel was, be good in your heart, and then your legs will take you to the right places. And maybe this is saying that if you've sinned, and you think you can avoid it, maybe there's no avoiding it. Maybe that's the idea here. Tanya. Now we get back to the Simcha Pera Shoeva and all special things that happen, all these exciting things that happen there. Tanya Amur alav al Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Kshaya Sameach Simcha Pera Shoeva, Haya notel shmona avukim shel or, v'zorek echa v'notel echa ve'eno gotzo bazo. He knew how to juggle with fire. Okay, now we're going to start seeing all this juggling and special feats, right? You think of the rabbis as these serious people that sat in the Beit Midrash learning, but now we see they had these hidden talents, and he could juggle with fire. And he would do it at the Simcha Pera Shoeva. When he would bow, he would stick his two thumbs in the ground. If you basically do a handstand, kiss the ground, okay? And no one else was able to do what he could do. This is what we call a kida. We've come across this before. And Levi tried to show Rebbe what a kida was. He tried to do it before him, and he became lame. He couldn't walk out, he limped after that. So you see that really only Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel knew how to do this. And when someone tried it, right, they weren't very successful. Maybe it's saying, don't try this in your own home. Vaha garmale. Wait, is that what caused him to be lame? Don't we know from another story that it was something else that caused him to be lame? We're going to see a Gemara from Ta'anit. Don't kind of shout out to God like, say to God, oh, how could you not do this? And speak to God in a disrespectful manner like that. Share Adam Gadol, because it was a big person, a very important person, prominent person, Levi it was. He became lame after he shouted out to God and said, how could you do this? What was the case? There was no rain. They prayed for rain and the rain didn't come. And he said to God, how is it that you can't bring rain? Now, in the end, God brought the rain, but he got punished for the way he spoke toward God. We'll get to this in Masechet Ta'anit. Umanu, and who is this? This is Levi. So how could you say that that's the case? So the Gemara answers, Havaha Garmule. It was both. And maybe this is very similar to the Raglayim thing about the legs, right? In other words, first of all, it had to do with really had to do more with his hands than his legs because he was upside down. But the idea being here that when God was going to punish him in this way, and that he brought it upon himself, basically, right? From what he did, he got the punishment that he was deserving for what he had done previously. Levi hava mitayel kameh de Rebbe betimne sakine. Now we're going to see other feats that rabbis did, but here I want you to notice it doesn't talk about in the context of Simcha Pera Shoeva. And in fact, Rashi says that Levi would juggle in front of Rebbe with 8 knives, and again, not right, it's dangerous, but he managed to do it without getting hurt. And why did he do this? So Rashi says very interestingly, if we look at Rashi, kameh de Rebbe, it's the second wide line. Bibeito shahaya nasi umechabdino to lesamcho. He would go to Rebbe in his house. Rashi is trying to tell you this isn't Simcha Pera Shoeva. He would go, well, first of all, how do you know it's not Simcha Pera Shoeva? Because the Beit HaMikdash was not around in the time of Rebbe. So obviously we're not talking about the Simcha Pera Shoeva anymore. So he said he was the Nasi, and he would respect him by going to make him happy. Why? Okay, classic. He was always worried about people being sick, about the nation, about the problems of the nation. It was very heavy on him. And Levi would come to kind of cheer him up and make him smile and relax. So So that's Rebbe, that's Levi, what he would do. Shmuel, Kamei Shavur Malka, B'timnaya Mazge Chamra. Shavur Malka is the Persian king, and we see him in a lot of different sugyot, and they had good relations with the Jews. So he said that Shmuel Shmuel, we know, is a master of all kind of talents. He knew about astronomy. He knew about medicine. He knew about all sorts of things. And now we're going to learn that he also knew how to juggle. So he would take 8 glasses of wine, full of wine, juggle them without the wine spilling. That seems like a pretty good feat. Abai Kamed Rabba, so Abai in front of Rabba, who was his adopted father, B'timnaya Bay, he would juggle 8 eggs. Also seems pretty impressive. Amre Laba Arba Abe. Some people say 4. It wasn't 8. 8 sounds quite extreme. Tanya. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. Now we're back to the Simcha Beit HaShoeva. Another Braita. He said, Kshayinu Smichim Simcha Beit HaShoeva. He's saying he's describing the time before the temple was destroyed. Lo Ra'inu Shena Be'einenu. We never slept. Right now, Gemara is going to ask, what do you mean you never slept? It was a whole week long. I mean, it's true there was Shabbat and Chag in the middle that you didn't have it, but all other times, right? You have, it's 5 days of the week. You're not going to 5 or 6. You're not going to sleep. Ketzad. So first of all, they're going to say, before we get to that question, the Gemara is going to say, Ketzad. So how would the celebrations go? Okay, what was their daily routine and why didn't they sleep? And then we'll say, how could it be they didn't sleep? It's not human to not sleep. And we'll prove it from another comment of Rabbi Yochanan, a halacha that seems to indicate that people definitely have to sleep within that time period. Ketzad, Sha'ali Shonah, so in the beginning of the morning, what would they do? Tamid Shel Shachar, right? The first sacrifice of the day. Misham L'Tfilah, from there they would go to pray. It shows you there was prayer in Second Temple times, right? Which kind of developed toward the end of Second Temple period times, which is obvious. Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya is obviously talking about the end of the time period. Misham L'Korban Musaf. Then they would do the extra additional sacrifices for the holiday. Misham L'Tfilah L'Musafin. Then they would pray the prayer for Musaf. Misham LeBeit HaMidrash, then they would go learn. Misham LaChila U'Shtiyah, then they would go eat and drink. Misham LeTfilat HaMincha, then they would pray Mincha. Misham LeTamid Shel Bein HaArbaim, then they would do the afternoon sacrifice. Mikam Ba'elach L'Simcha Beit HaShoeva. After the afternoon sacrifices, what I said earlier, they would then do the Simcha Beit HaShoeva, and then that would go all the way till the morning, till they did the water libation. Interesting, they don't list the water libation here. I guess, first of all, according to Rashi, the water libation was part of the Korban Tamid of the morning. Makes perfect sense that it wouldn't be listed separately because it's just part of that. So now the Gemara asks the question I mentioned before. Imi, could it really be true that they didn't sleep all those days? V'hama Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Shvu'ah shelo ishan shlosha yamim, malkino tov yashen la'alter. If I swear that I'm not going to sleep for 3 days, I get lashes. Why do I get lashes for saying that? Because I clearly did a false swearing, right? Shvu'at shav, because there is no such thing as not sleeping for 3 days. And yashen la'alter, and as soon as that, right, then I can go to sleep right away because it wasn't a meaningful swearing. So clearly you can't go 3 days without sleeping. We would doze on the shoulders of our friends. In other words, we'd fall asleep on each other. We wouldn't go to sleep in our beds. We wouldn't have a full night's sleep. We would catnap, right? But we would nap, but we wouldn't sleep. Okay, this reminds me of people in the army. You know, my daughter in the last Mivtza in the army did a 36-hour shift, which I assume she slept a little bit in between. I mean, she told me she didn't sleep for 36 hours straight, but I assume she must have slept a little bit, right? Nobody doesn't sleep for 3 days, but she didn't actually really sleep properly. So that's what I think of when I think of this. Okay, now if you thought the other stories were interesting, now we get a really interesting, bizarre story. It's going to sound a lot like Greek mythology. And we're going to see, and maybe there's some connection. So there were these 15 stairs that went down from the Ezrat Nashim from the Azara to the Ezrat Nashim. Right? Remember, the Azara was higher, and then from there you go down to the Ezrat Nashim, and the Kohanim would stop on the 10th step, which we're going to see later which step was the 10th step. We'll talk about that soon. Rav Chisda had a student that knew Agadah stories. So he said to him, says the following, did you ever hear anything about these 15 Shirei HaMa'alot? Because 15 stairs called the Ma'alot were in were corresponding to the 15 Shirei HaMa'alot that appear in Sefer Tehillim. So he says to him, do you ever hear anything about these 15 Shirei HaMa'alot that David said? Why did he say 15 of them? What was it all about? Amar le hachi amar Rabbi Yochanan. He says, this is what Rabbi Yochanan said. B'sha'a shekara David shitin. When David dug the shitin, remember we talked about the shitin, where they dug, right? Were they from Yemei Bereshit, or were they dug by man? So according to this, when David dug them up, okay, maybe they were somewhat created before him, but they had to be actually dug anyway, or maybe they were just by man. So remember what we said about them. If you hold that they were from Yemei Bereshit, still he had to dig down and get to, remember, the Shitin go all the way to the depths, right? To where what are the depths here, the Tahom? It's where there's water underneath the earth. Okay, so David starts digging down toward this Mei Tahom, which exists from Yemei Bereshit. And, this sounds like there's some Greek god at the bottom there. Okay, this image of like a god who's going to say, you're going into my territory. Like, what are you doing here? And even if you don't view it as a Greek god, right, you could almost say, maybe it's God getting angry. Like, what are you doing getting close to? This is like with the Bnei Elohim and the Benot HaAdam, when they married each other, and you can't mix heaven and earth, right? This isn't heaven, it's the opposite, but it's also, right, God. It's down there. It's the depths that don't belong to man. So when he starts digging these and he goes very deep down, Kifa Tahoma Uba Lenishtafa Alma. The Tahom, the abyss. So again, either this is God getting angry, or maybe it's like this image of some God of the depths getting angry and starts bursting up water and wants to destroy the world. It sounds like a second flood is about to come. So Amar David 15 ma'alot v'horidam. So David says the 15 Shirei HaMa'alot, and the waters descend back down and we're saved. So Ihachi, they say, wait a minute. Rav Chisda asks him, 1 second, something doesn't make sense about your story. 15 ma'alot, why do they call it then the 15 ma'alot, like going up? Your dot mebaile, it should be going down. 15 down, I don't know how you would translate that, but right, song of descents, I guess, because it was all about the water descending rather than the song of ascents. So Amalei, so the guy who tells the drashot says to him, you know what? Ho'il ve'ad kirtan hachi itmar. You know what? You reminded me. I'm going to fix my story, and this is really how it went. Right? This is a good example of when you say these stories weren't necessarily true, right? You say, I'll tell you the story to fit the way you said. So b'sha'a shekara David shitin kafat tahom uba lemishvei alma. So the same thing happened, right? The story starts off the same way. David was digging down these drain pipes, and he was getting close to the tahom, to the abyss, and to the depths. And down there at the depths, they start getting angry. They spurt up water. They want to destroy the world. Amar David. David has his idea, but he's not worried if halachically he can do it. Right? This is the rabbis writing halacha into, the head of David HaMelech. Amar David, mi ika diyada, does anyone know? Ishare lemichtav shem achaspa, b'nishtir b'tahoma umanach. Can I write God's name on an earthenware shard and put it into the water, even though what will happen to it? It'll likely erase. But that will resolve the problem. If I throw the name of God down, then I know that will help. So can I do this or not? Or at least I'm hoping that will help. So what's the response of all his chachamim, so to speak, his sages? Nobody answers him. So David gets a little bit upset. Why is no one answering me? He says, he doesn't think it's because they don't have the answer. Amar David, kol diyada lememar ve'eno omer yechaneg begrono. Anyone who knows to say and doesn't say will get choked in his throat. Now, you might say, right, what's the connection to choking in your throat? So what does throat sound like? Remember we compared the shitin to the throat. We said that when they pour the water down, they put the pkat, they cork it up so that the wine spills over, because when you drink wine, and then they said from here you learn that the pleasure of wine is while it's in your throat and not down below, and that the idea here that it collects kind of before it goes down. So I thought it was an interesting connection here. I don't know what to make of it, but I thought immediately, you think of a throat and the pipe going down, and that's the shitin going down. So it's a very interesting analogy. Anyway, he says, if you know and you don't say, you're going to be choked. Nasach Achitofel kavachomer batzmo. Achitofel, who was known as one of the yoatzim to the king, eventually gets killed, but he makes a kavachomer batzmo. He makes this kavachomer. ומה לעשות שלום בין איש לאשתו? אמרה התורה שמי שנכתב בקדושה יימחה על המים. לעשות shalom l'kol olam kolo al acha kama v'kama. When do we have the gods, the name of God being erased? In the sota. When it comes to the sota, when we're not sure if she slept with someone or not, so we write a text, part of the parshat from the Torah. In it is the name of God. It goes down into the water, and it gets erased in the water, and then it eventually dissolves, and then she drinks the water, and that determines whether she has really cheated on him or not, whether her stomach explodes or not. So now, in this case, it's to make peace between one man and wife, right? Because if in the end it comes out clean, then we know that it's okay and they can go back and be happily married. Of course, that's a whole separate question, how they could be happily married after undergoing such a situation like that, but we're not going to go there today. We have a whole Masechet Sota to deal with it. But if that's the case, to make peace between all of the world, in other words, this was to save the world because the world was going to be destroyed, of course we can allow it. So that's his kal v'chomer that he does, and therefore Amar le share. So he says to David, yes, it's permissible. Katav shem achaspa, so David writes God's name on the shard, v'shade l'tahoma, and he throws it in there, unachet tahomar shitzar alfe garmide. And the tahom goes down, the water goes all the way back to the depths, 16,000 cubits down. Okay, so we're still not connected to this 15 ma'alot yet, but we'll get there soon. So before we even get there, I want to think about what's going on here, right? If you think about this connection to the Greek myths, now the rabbis knew about these Greek myths, and maybe this is a reaction to it. And it's saying, you think there's a God of the right of the depths, and there's this, Poseidon, God of the waters, and you think, they could get angry, but it's God who wins out above, right? When you throw down the name of God, that's telling them you're nobody, God is everything. And it's almost like an image of God winning out over the gods. So anyway, that's something to think about. Then what happens? He says, wait, the water went down 16,000 cubits? That's way too far down. We need water. Right? We need to be able to have water to have things grow in our world. That's so far away from earth that will never have anything grow. So therefore, Amar Chamesh Ma'alot, now you're going to see what the 15 are for and why it's going up and not going down. Va'aske Chameshar Alfe Garmida. And the water then went up 15,000 cubits. And that's why the ma'alot are about the ascent of the water after he got it to go down. Then he got it to go ascend 15,000 cubits. And then it was distance from the world, from the earth, 1,000 cubits. And that already is a normal range to be kind of protect us from it, but also, right, which is interesting because it's obviously getting at, tsunamis and all sorts of fears they had about the water, that sometimes the water comes up from the depths and destroys, right? So it's saying it's kept it at a fair distance from us, that it could still destroy, but it also could be very useful for us. Amar Ula Shmamina. Ula says we can learn from here. I don't know what the relevance is, but Sumcha Da'ara Alfe Garmide, that the thickness of the earth is 1,000 cubits because, right, you have earth and underneath that is water. But they say, wait, that doesn't really help us because we know, and what they seem to be talking about, which we'll see in a minute, is the mountains of Babylonia. If you dig a little bit, you get to water. In other words, there's water up high, not down below, 1,000 cubits below earth. So that water is not the water from the depths. In other words, there's water from the depths, and then there's water that comes from the Euphrates. That water, right, it goes upward, and therefore you have it also in the mountains. But that's not the same water that we're talking about here. That's a different water. Okay, that's a whole interesting story. We said a little bit about it. I'm sure there's a lot more to be said. We will move on. Now we're back to the procession of the Kohanim. So Amdu Kohanim b'shar ha'elyon sheyored, and then they go down the steps, and at the 10th step they stop and they blow the trumpets. By Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah always asks these nudniki questions that don't always have significance to them, and this one really it's not so clear what the significance would be. L'ma'ala asirit. When they say the 10th step, is it dinachich chamisha v'kayas asara? Does it mean you went down from the Ezrat Yisrael 5 steps and then you stood at the 10th from the bottom? Or Dilma dinachich asara v'kaya chamisha? Or did you go down 10 steps and stand at the 5th step from the bottom, but 10 steps from the top? 10th step from the top. So it's all a matter of your perspective. What does it mean, the 10th step, right? If you're standing in one place, 10th step is not the same as standing in the other place. So which one is it? And like many of Rabbi Yirmiyah's questions, they get answered with teku. We don't actually know. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to talk about that very strange pasuk that they quoted from Yechezkel, where they said, where when they get to the ceremony, they say, our fathers stood in the same place and their faces were away from the Hechal and they faced east. Okay, now, so the Gemara is going to ask, Tanu Rabbanan, a Braita is going to ask, when it says they're facing east, do we not know that their backs are to the Hechal? Obviously, if you're facing east and you're in the temple, it's obvious that your back is to the Hechal. So Elamata Mulamar Chorehem Lechal Hashem, this is going to get a little disgusting. They would take down their clothes, facing, right, their backs facing God, and they would defecate right there in the temple. Okay, that's how disgraceful they were. Okay, a little bit strange. The reaction, right? So we quote this pasuk and then we say, our fathers did this, by the way, this is the same idea as the beginning of the daf, that we want to kind of conjure up this image of reward and punishment, right? And how they did that. And that's why the temple was destroyed. And we are now in the second temple and it's not going to be destroyed, even though, right, it was ultimately, but because we're not doing things the way they did them. So now, what do we say? Anu liyahu liyainenu. We are to you, and to you are our eyes. So the Gemara has a problem with this. Ini, really? V'ha amar Rabbi Zera, kol omer shma shma, ki'ilu omer modim modim. You can't say modim modim twice. Why not modim modim twice? Because modim modim is saying, I'm thanking God twice. It almost sounds like you're believing in two gods, like the pagans. Oh, and by the way, thank you for someone who reminded me to say this, that the defecating was something they did to Baal Peor. It was a way of worshiping one of the pagan gods. They would do it by defecating. So this is also conjuring up this image of Avodah Zarah almost. So anyone who says Shema, Shema, it's as if you say Modim, Modim. You can't say things twice because it sounds like you're going to two different gods. How could you say Anu liyahu liyainenu? You're saying God's name twice as if there's two gods. They say, no, this is how you should read it. Hema mishtachavim kedma. Our fathers, they were bowing east, which was the wrong way. Va'anu liyam mishtachavim. It's missing the word, but the Bach says add that word in. We to you are bowing, not to the east. Ve'einenu liyam yachalot. And our eyes are looking toward you, are beseeching you in prayer. So the liyah is used with two different verbs, which means we're saying we're bowing to God and we're praying to God. That already doesn't sound like two different gods. New Mishnah is going to talk about how many trumpet blasts there were in the temple. You can't do less than 21. Every day had at least 21, and some days had 48. That was the maximum. And we're going to see the maximum happened on Sukkot, on Erev Shabbat. There were 21 trumpet blasts on a regular day. How so? When they opened up the gates of the temple, 3 blasts. 3 always means tkiya, trua, tkiya. Okay, one set of 3 blasts. Like when we say the minimum by Torah law that you need is 30 blasts. So that means, right, a tkiya is 1, trua is 1, shvarim is 1. Even shvarim trua is considered 2 separate blasts when the count. Okay, even though you do it as one long blast. This is good. We're in, this is trumpet blast. It's not shofar blast, but we're in the mindset of shofar. It's Elo blowing shofar every day, and Rosh Hashanah obviously is around the corner. So 3 for opening the gates. Tesha l'tamid shel shachar. When they brought the tamid shel shachar and the tamid of ben arbaim, they would say a shiur. The Leviim would sing a song, and they would split it into 3. And each section they would blow trumpet blasts. So 9, right? So each time 3, and each 3 times 3, because each one was 3 blasts. So 9 for the tamid shel shachar. Tesha l'tamid shel ben arbaim. The afternoon one also 3. And in the Musafim, they had a special shiur. Then also they would split it into 3. Hayu Musafim od Tesha. Okay, so that was on a holiday. You would get 3 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9. Okay, so that would be 27, 3, 30. Ube'erev Shabbat hayu Musafim 6. On Erev Shabbos, they would do another 6. 3 lavtil ta'ami melacha. 3 to tell the people stop working. And another 3, 3 lavdil ben kodesh l'chol, to say, it really should be ben chol l'kodesh, right? To say Shabbat is starting. in Masechet Shabbat, we saw they did 6 sets of these. Okay, but that was outside the temple. This is in the temple. Erev Shabbat b'toch hachag hayu sham 48. And here comes the most that you do, which is if you combine what we had in the beginning, you combine, right? That was 30. You combine the extra 6 for Shabbat, that's 36. And then on Sukkot, we had special ones, which we're going to see in a minute. Shalosh, and that we already saw actually in the Mishnah of the Simchat Beis HaShoeva. Shalosh l'miloi hamayim, when they would go fill up the water in the shilach, they would do 3. Shalosh al gabei hamizbeach, when they poured the water libation on the altar, they would also blow the shofar. Shalosh al gabei hamizbeach, my mistake. Gabei mizbeach is the arava on the mizbeach. We saw that in the Mishnah, I think it's Memhei, where it talked about the arava, and they would blow the shofar when they put the aravot around the altar. Teisha l'tamid shel shachar, 9 for the morning. Teisha l'tamid shel ben arba'im, these are the usual. Teisha l'musafin, those are the 27 we did on the holidays. Shalosh l'avtil ta'ami melacha, 3 to tell the people stop doing work. Shalosh l'avdil ben kodesh l'chol, and 3 because of ben kodesh l'chol. So we got to our 48. We had, did I skip something? I think I definitely skipped something. Sorry. I missed a whole line. Okay, let me go back. 48. Shalosh l'ptichat sha'arim, I missed that. 3 for opening the gate. Shalosh l'shar ha'elyon. This is the ones we saw in the Mishnah by the Simchat Beis HaShoeva, when the Kohanim go, right, and they go out the gate at the Shar Nikanor. They say, when they pass right outside the Azara, Shalosh l'shar ha'elyon, 3 there, Shalosh l'shar ha'tachton, the next gate, Shalosh l'miloi hamayim, Shalosh al gabei mizbeach, 3 to fill up the water, and then on the altar for the aravot. So basically, you have an extra 6 here, specifically for this procession of the Kohanim. It's a bit of a problem, because if you look in our Mishnah, there's 2 different versions, and there's at least 3 sets, if not 4 sets. And here there's only 2 sets of these Kohanim as they're going down. And it says tokim v'olchim. It sounds like they're continually blowing in a number of places. Here it only mentions 2. We'll get to that in the Gemara tomorrow. Okay, so with that, we get to 48. So now the Gemara says, needing to lo ki Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah must not be like Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Detanya Rabbi Yehuda omer, hapochet lo yivchot misheva. The least you can do is 7. And the maximum is 16. And ours said 21 and 48. Now, if you notice, 7 times 3 and 16 times 3 is 21 and 48. So the Gemara is going to say, what's the root of their machloket? Rabbi Yehuda savar t'kia achati. You count each set of 3 as only 1. It's not 3 separate blasts, like I said before. It's just 1. And therefore, you end up really saying the same thing. Rabbanan savar t'kia l'chud, you count them separately. So first they're going to say, what's the reason? Okay, where do they get it from? My time to Rabbi Yehuda. And also it says, it's in parentheses, but most people read this, uchtiv tru'a yitka'u. Okay, how could that be? That it says utkatem tru'a, and it says tru'a yitka'u in different order? It must be tkiya and tru'a achati. And when it says, some people say you could just prove it from 1. Utkatem tru'a, you should do a tkiya of tru'a. That must mean a tkiya is a tru'a. They're all one and the same. Okay, which means that it's all 1, which means that each one is counted as a separate thing. No, the reason why it says utkatem tru'a and then tru'a yitka'u, which, when the tkiya comes first, when the tkiya comes second, it must mean you have to surround each tru'a with a tkiya, and that's why we do it in that way. But they're each counted separately. So then they say, Rabbanan, my time, what's their reason? What's their proof? It says in Sefer Bamidbar, when it says all the times you're supposed to blow the trumpets, it says that when you gather the people and you want them to come, you blow the shofar with a tkiya, not a truah. That obviously means its tkiya is not a truah. Otherwise, it wouldn't say blow the tkiya without the truah. If it's all one and the same, if you're going to say, 1 tkiya means a tkiya, and in this time they tell you only do tkiya, they wouldn't be telling you to do half a mitzvah. It doesn't make any sense. So what does Rabbi Yehuda say to that? Rabbi Yehuda, when it says when you gather the people, blow the trumpets, it just means make a loud noise so everybody comes. It's not a mitzvah. That's something different. So Rabbanan says, Simanahu v'rachmana shavya mitzvah. It's true, it's just to gather the people, but the Torah counts it as a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah, and therefore you can't do half a mitzvah, and therefore it must be, each one is its own separate mitzvah. Tkiya, a truah, a tkiya, they're all separate, and that's why they count as 3 and not as 1. Last line for today, Keman az lahad amar Rav Kahana, ein bein tkiya l'truah v'lo klum. According to is the statement that Rav Kahana said, you can't take a break in between the tkiya and the truah, which the Gemara says, Keman, ke Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda because Rabbi Yehuda says, can't take, right? It's all one thing, and that's why you can't take a break. To which the Gemara questions, Pshita, isn't that totally obvious? Why would you need to tell us that? Obviously, it's Rabbi Yehuda. So for that, you're going to have to wait till tomorrow. Have a Shavua Tov, everyone.